All right. Well, welcome everyone to our book talk for the month of August. And it is on Zora Neale Hurston's Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. I am Felicia Durden, and I'll be facilitating this evening. It's such a pleasure to have you all here. I think we're going to have some really good discussion this evening about Zora Neale Hurston and her book. All right. So what I want to do, and I usually start, is just by giving us a little background on the authors that we are discussing. And so this month we have one of my very favorite authors. I have a degree in English literature, and so I remember reading her stories when I was in college, and I was just always inspired by them. And so when the book came out, I just knew that it was one that we should be sharing and having some discussions about. So just a little background on Zora and her life. She was a Southerner. So she was born in Alabama in 1891 on January the 7th. She came from a pretty large family. She was a fifth child of a family of 8, and she was only one of 2 girls in the family. Her family then moved to Florida shortly after her birth, and they lived in a town called Eatonville. And it was a very established town at that time for African Americans. It was a place where people of color were able to go and truly make a mark for themselves. So a lot of educated Blacks lived here, and her family was one of those families that moved to this area. Upon hearing that this town, Zora's father found out it was solely African American, so only African Americans lived here. Her father, named John, felt that this was an appropriate place for him to bring his large family because he wanted them to have the opportunity to be amongst people of color, but also that were of a higher stature, in his opinion. So Zora didn't have a really close relationship with her dad, however. She said really that her only trouble in life came from her relations with her father early on. They just didn't seem to see eye to eye. When Zora was only 13 years old, unfortunately, her mother passed. And we already know that she wasn't having a really good relationship with her dad. And so she took to the road, and that would eventually lead her to Harlem, New York, where she really flourished. During that time, as a very young girl, she was traveling as a maid with a singer named Miss M. And they were in the Miss M was in the Gilbert and Sullivan Repertoire Company. And I know we probably all heard of Gilbert and Sullivan. And so she toured with this company. She was just a maid there, but she met a man there who had lots of books, and he shared them with her, and she started reading. And he saw that because of her ability to read these books, that she had a talent for reading and even writing. And so this is how her beginnings of becoming an author sort of started, was in this troupe when she was traveling along. When the troupe finally stopped in Baltimore, Maryland, Miss M told Zora she should quit the company and go and get an education. They could see something greater in her, that she was meant to be more than a maid, that she should go back to school because she had an aptitude for books and reading and talking. And so she took Miss M's advice. So Miss M was kind of like a mother figure for her, because remember, she lost her mom at 13. And so the people in the troupe really treated her well and kind of took her under their wing. So that was what happened. She went ahead and went to school, and she went to Howard Academy. At the time, that's what it was called. It's what we now know as Howard University, which is one of the historical Black colleges and university. And in May of 1919, she received her diploma. Ooh, keep going. So while she was at Howard, another interesting thing happened. So you know how things happen in our lives for a reason. And sometimes we don't know that they're leading us up to our future. She became a member of the Stylist, which was a literary journal at Howard. And it was published by Howard University's Literary Club. And she wrote her first short story, John Redding Goes to Sea, which is the first story in the book that we're going to be discussing, short story. And it caught the attention of a professor there named Alain Locke, excuse me. And he also saw in her a greatness that he could see, okay, this young lady has a talent for writing. And so he also planted those seeds for her that she could do something with this, that this is something that is innately in her to do. And so she arrived in Harlem not too long after that, and she started her writing career. This was during the Harlem Renaissance, which is one of the most exciting times in history for African Americans. And she met such writers as Langston Hughes, Fannie Hurst, and they began to recognize her work. She was actually a very prolific writer. She wrote all the time. And just from reading anecdotes about her and biographies, she really used her writing as a way to clear her soul. And sometimes that's what writers do. It's just a way for them. They have so much inside them, so much in their head. And by writing these things down on paper, it's cathartic and it's a way almost of therapy. And so Zora focused on what she knew. What she knew was the Black existence and the Black experience. And she wrote about that. And she wrote about it in such a raw and fashionable way. And those two probably don't go together. But it was raw, and that she wrote sometimes in dialect. And she wrote about the truth of what she saw. But also there was an elegance to her. As we see the pictures of her with her beautiful hats, she was a very eloquent woman, and people really were drawn to her. And by her stature and the way that she presented herself, she was able to really reflect the lives of African Americans, but also be a role model for others because they looked up to her. So I'm going to show you a really quick video clip of a little bit about Zora's life. Here we go with technology. I'm getting a lot better. Can you guys see the screen? Okay.
Yes. I can.
Born on January 7th, 1891, in Nottasuga, Alabama, Zora Neale Hurston became the most successful and most significant Black woman writer of the first half of the 20th century. Moving with her family to Eatonville, Florida, this rural community near Orlando was the nation's first incorporated Black township.
Michelle, I'm not sure.
In Eatonville, Zora was never.
I just see you.
And she could see the evidence of Black achievement all around her. Growing up in this setting
just see you. I don't see the screen.
5 acres of land, Zora's father, John Hurston, formulated the laws that governed Eatonville, and her mother, Lucy Potts Hurston, directed the Christian curricula. Hurston's picturesque childhood would come to an abrupt end when her mother died in 1904. Zora was only 13 years old. That hour began my wandering, she later wrote, not so much in geography, but in time. Then not so much in time as in spirit. After working a series of menial jobs, struggling to finish her schooling, and a stint with the Gilbert and Sullivan traveling troupe as an aide to the lead singer, in 1917, at the age of 26, she ended up in Baltimore. Still having the desire to finish high school, Zora presented herself as a teenager to qualify for free public schooling, giving her age as 16. Studying anthropology at Bernard College and Columbia University, and possessing a fiery intellect to accompany her bright eyes, big smile, and passion for arts and culture, Zora used those talents, plus dozens more, to bulldoze her way into the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, befriending such luminaries as poet Langston Hughes and popular singer-actress Ethel Waters. Though Hurston rarely drank, fellow writer Sterling Brown recalled, when Zora was there, she was the party. Zora traveled during the 1920s and 30s and primarily conducted fieldwork as an ethnologist and folklorist in African-American communities of the South and Caribbean, where she collected the stories, music, and the oral poetry that filled the air of both work and leisure in everyday life. Here's an excerpt from one of her recordings with Alan Lomax.
As you hear it all over? The tune is consistent. But the verses, you know, how things, every locality, you find some new verses everywhere.
I mean, does it have to contain floral verses? Does it have Mule on the Mount wherever you hear it?
Well, there's some place I haven't heard that same verse, Mule on the Mount, but there's no place that I don't hear some of the same verses. Captain got a mule, mule on the mount, call him Jerry. Captain got a mule, mule on the mount, call him Jerry. Gonna ride him down.
Hurston had published several short stories, articles, a novel, and a well-received collection of Black Southern folklore, along with several plays and musicals, one written with the Harlem Renaissance legend Langston Hughes. Her folklorist work also include moments with Delta blues great Gabriel Brown and Rochelle French. In 1945, having worry of possibly dying without money, Hurston wrote W.E.B. Du Bois in regards to a cemetery for the illustrious Negro dead on 100 acres of land in Florida with a persuasive argument. Let no Negro celebrity, no matter what financial conditions they may be in death, lie in inconspicuous forgetfulness. We must assume the responsibility of their graves.
All right. I am actually going to stop it there. I'm glad you guys were able to hear her voice and also hear her singing. As you see, she was more than just a writer. She was an activist, and she tried to stand up for the others in her community. The fact that she contacted W.B. Du Bois and asked him about having no one who was an artist not have a dignified burial showed that she had a care for others and a care for her community. You also in there, again, get to hear her sing. And she just, for me, you know, I like to hear her recordings because you can learn a lot about an artist just by videos of them, that she had just a sweetness about her, that she was truly a woman who cared for others. All right, we'll go forth. Now, the Harlem Renaissance is, we can't talk about Zora Neale Hurston without talking about the Harlem Renaissance. When I took my college courses on Black history and on the Harlem Renaissance, her name had to come up just as often as Langston Hughes and those at the Cotton Club. She was just ingrained in there. And it was such an important time for African Americans, for their social thought. They were able to express themselves in painting, in art, in music, in dance, in theater, in literature. It was just a very booming time during the 20s and 30s. It was just a very alive time. And Zora Neale Hurston played a huge role in it, that during this time, she was so prolific in her writing and had such an impact on the community and abroad, actually. As I said in that video clip, she not only wrote books, but she wrote articles. And one of the stories that we're going to discuss today, she described Harlem in a very nice way. And that is in a bit of Our Harlem. And we'll talk about that in a minute. She personified it, Our Harlem. So let's really quickly, we got to understand the Harlem Renaissance in order to move forth. So we're going to watch a quick one. This is a 3-minute clip here about the Harlem Renaissance, which was a huge part of Zora's life. Hold on one moment. And I've gotten so much smarter with this that I actually have to open up the other video before I can share it. So you guys will bear with me. I can see it, but I can't see how I can pull it up. That is the only thing with technology, everyone. Okay, here we go. So that one was paused. So we're going to escape out of there. I'm going to stop sharing that one. And again, I do appreciate your patience with me. Yep, that one's not sharing. I want to make sure I have the right clip. Yeah, I do. Okay, 1 second. Back into Zoom. All right, can you guys see it now?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
Yeah.
The Harlem Renaissance is one of the most iconic cultural periods in African American history. Throughout the decade of the 1920s, Black writing, art, and music flourished, ushering in a cultural revolution that rocked the United States.
One of the most important factors that accounted for the rise of what we know of as the Harlem Renaissance is the migration of Black peoples from the South to urban centers like Harlem.
The Jim Crow era began after Reconstruction, and every Southern African American had to think about, what should we do? Should we go or should we stay? For many of these people, it was a matter of life and death, literally.
Sometimes in the most repressive times, we create the most extraordinary art.
Amidst the fervor of the Great Migration, bold, exciting forms of Black music evolved,
Cap Calloway.
along with venues to listen and dance to this music. Blues and jazz clubs became a central part of life in Harlem, where artists such as Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, Bessie and Mamie Smith rose to prominence.
Began to cry. He went away and never even said goodbye.
The era also saw the burgeoning of literary work by and about African Americans, which the writer Alain Locke compiled into an anthology. He called it The New Negro, and its name came to define a movement.
The Harlem Renaissance is a facet of a larger movement that we think of as the New Negro movement, where you have a new generation of Black people, by this point, 2 generations out of slavery, using the arts as a way to help people gain broader civil and political rights.
Some of the framers of what became the Renaissance make the argument that the artistic worth of a people has to be proven by the worth of the art and literature they produced, especially for people that historically, over centuries, have been defined as without culture, without history, and without any record of achievement.
The Harlem Renaissance was the flowering of creativity that had been suppressed for centuries. People that had the sense that things were opening up. And finally, we could be the people that we imagine ourselves to be.
I just love Henry Louis Gates. He gives us history in 2 minutes flat. He's amazing. All right, so just from what you just saw, any comments on the Harlem Renaissance or anything interesting about it that caught your attention? While I try to get ourselves back situated. Tara, I'm going to pick on you. Anything to share?
It's always been an exciting thing for me. It seemed like such vibrance, which is contradictory to what you would have expected at that time. The style and, just hear about it and how it fed even into the stories you hear about the Cotton Club. So I've always thought of it as such vibrance, such style, so much energy, and what a time.
Right. And I think because we actually went to school together. We grew up together. During our time, the videos like Janet Jackson, Michael Jackson, they romanticized it when I can't remember what the video was, but Janet Jackson, Cab Calloway was on there. And it just, the way we dressed even during that time, it just was a very vibrant time. The the 80s, 90s, we brought back a lot of the style that they wore during that time. So it almost seems like it was a part of me too. Thank you, Tara. Anyone else?
I want to say that Satchmo, very much of the personification, not only of the Harlem Renaissance, but of his own style of music. I couldn't help but remember reading how he acquired his name, Satchmo. When I read a story that was written or supposedly written, maybe not, but Lady Day gave him a nickname just by chance, by accident, when they were both very young, traveling the so-called Chitlin Circuit together. And he carried what she called a satchel. And one evening, and this is the story that I read, I'll share it with you. One evening they were getting back on the bus because they were traveling in the evening and at nighttime because they were going through sundown towns. And so she was joking with him because they got along so well. They were such good friends. And she was just joking with him. And she said, "What you got in that satchel? What you got in that satchel?" The way she said it. And he started laughing about her using that word. And she then decided that she was going to call him Satchel. Instead of Satchel, it came out Satchmo. And that is how I read the story, that she gave him that name, and it stayed.
That's cute.
Whenever he traveled, and he went everywhere with his
satchel,
with the trumpet and so forth, it became known that that was what he was going to be called, and everyone started calling him that. And it was Billie Holiday later who laughed about it years later, when someone asked her, "Is it true that you gave him that nickname?" And she was just so tickled about that question. And she didn't want to verify yes or no. She just wanted the person who asked that question to wonder about it.
That's so Billie Holiday.
I love that.
And that says something about Billie Holiday too.
Yeah, it does.
Part of this Harlem Renaissance as a young woman, as a young girl. And so it's so many of these young men and women traveling together, trying to earn a living, trying to do well, just living. And the main thing was, what was driving them was the music that you heard in this period of time called the Harlem Renaissance.
Beautiful time. Thank you for sharing that, Christine. Thank you.
Welcome.
Beautiful story.
Yes.
All right. So as we've seen, there's a Cotton Club. You can't talk about the Harlem Renaissance without the Cotton Club. It did help redefine how Americans understood the new Negro, they said in that little clip we saw, but the AfricanAmerican culture. And it was just a celebration, a time that sets the stage for the civil rights movement that was going to be coming in the 50s and 60s, a time when people were coming together and understanding their culture. I really like what the one man said in there, that, you know, before it was seen that African Americans didn't have any culture, but it was a time when our culture was just thriving, just a really important time. And our queen of the Harlem Renaissance is touted to be Zora. She wrote more than 50 articles, short stories, 4 novels, 2 books, folklore, autobiographies, and even some plays. And so, as I said earlier, she was just so prolific during this time that she was considered to be the queen of the Harlem Renaissance. And I think that that says a lot, because there are so many people that were around during that time and trying to make a name for themselves. But all those people we talked about earlier that saw that light in her and saw that she had something to offer and that she should be going back to school and not being a maid to the lead singer, but going back to school and getting her education, it truly paid off because of just the beautiful works that she's left for us. So that gets us to the anthology that we're going to be beginning to talk about. And I like to take things slow. So we're just going to go over a few of the short stories this week, and we're going to extend upon it. But it's called Hitting a Straight Lick with a Crooked Stick. And I just love the title because it's just so colorful. it sounds like something that my mom would have said. My mom and dad are from Mississippi. And so they had so many little sayings that growing up that I just was tickled about. I was born here. My older brother and sister were born in Mississippi, but they just had so many little colloquialisms. So I think about hitting a straight lick with a crooked stick. It's just so cute and means a lot. I mean, you're hitting a straight lick, so you're going to hit someone straight, but you have a crooked stick. That's the way I see it. I could just see my grandma saying something like that. But there are 21 fictitious and folkloric short stories in this, written between 1921 to 1934. So it was spanning the Harlem Renaissance. And the beautiful thing about it is that they included 9 recovered short stories that had never before been published. And those were recovered in 2005, and they're included in the anthology. So let's dig into those first 3 short stories. And the way I try to do it, you know, maybe you haven't had time to read them all so in depth, but we'll discuss what we have. So the first one, we talked about it. That was when she was in college, and that was Alain Locke, who we saw a picture of him in the first video. This was that first story she wrote, that he saw evidence that she had a future for her. And this is what sent her into her writing career, I would say. So John Redding Goes to Sea. And I just did a little synopsis of it. It's about John Redding, who wants to leave his small town in Florida. Remember, she lived in Florida. Everything that authors write, it's always a little autobiographical because you write about what you know. And he wanted to go explore the world, but his mom was so afraid of losing him that she fakes an illness and begs him to stay home. And I could see a mom doing that. And then his wife, Stella, they didn't want them to leave the town, and they conspired together to make him stay. But he had an opportunity that he could join the U.S. Navy, but Mama throws a tantrum, and she compels him to decline that offer. But then one day, John drowned in a violent storm when he was working on the crew of the St. John's River. And rather than retrieve his body from the river, John's father lets it float out into the ocean so John can finally explore the world. Just think about what she wrote and think about her life in general. What do you think she was saying in that short story? If there's anything in it that you drew from, tell me your ideas. I have some, but I'll wait. They didn't bury him. They let him actually just float out because he finally gets to do what he wanted to do. What comes to mind?
Oh, that's his destiny.
Mm-hmm.
Whether he's alive or not, that he has a destiny to follow. And sometimes people help us move on to follow our destiny. And in this case, his father.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one word that came to mind, destiny.
Destiny. Thank you. Beautiful. Anyone else?
There's such a connection of this character's just deep desire, really like that destiny buried inside his heart, that he couldn't let go of it. Like almost like it was who he was. He's not going to be fulfilled. He won't be able to sleep. He won't be able to breathe until he fulfills this. It's almost like maybe it's her saying that I had to write, and I almost was him. And so I was set free. I was going to be a person who cleaned, but I was able to be creative. And I think that she's drawn on that passion and that deep desire to feel fulfilled and to be able to breathe again.
Oh, yes. I see that too. I see some autobiographical in here that, you know, she didn't let herself be held back, even though she had so many obstacles that she had to write. It was her destiny, truly, just as it was John's destiny. I think destiny is the perfect word to describe.
Felicia, to me, it was paradoxical in that he had barriers that kept him where he was, and then he didn't get to do really what he wanted. And once he died, his dad made the decision to allow him to be able to go and be free. But with her, she did get to travel, do things, but like I said, it was paradoxical because the only thing that was standing in her way was herself.
Right.
And two, she gave herself permission to be a writer and be something more than a maid.
Beautiful. Absolutely. John, unfortunately, these strong women in his life were able to kind of curtail his destiny, but his father knew that he truly needed to finally be able to explore the world. I could see that she was very young when she wrote this. I mean, it's just so beautifully written. It has such a strong message, like what Michelle was sharing, the paradox. It's just so rich. There's such a richness in there. Anyone else have anything that they found from reading John Redding Goes to Sea? Yes, go ahead.
I really like the relationship among the family members. The father, especially, his empathy for his son, to me, was so amazing. In many ways, it was his dream, too, to travel. But the respect the son had for his mother and his wife, they always came first. Even though he had this powerful desire to leave, he needed their permission. And he sacrificed his dream so many times because they begged him to stay. I just thought that whole familial relationship was so beautiful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Excellent. There was just a strong connection and duty that he was a dutiful husband and son, and that he was a self-sacrificing individual who sacrificed his own desires. Beautiful. It was a beautiful family portrait, I think. And I really enjoyed that story. Okay. Any other comments on that before we go to the next story?
There is a kind of a theme that runs through a lot of the stories of conjuring, especially in The Mother, where she heard the screech owl, and that was a sign of death. When I grew up, I had a Nana who, she was very, we'd say superstitious, but it was her belief. And so she was constantly telling me all these things that I, had to be aware of. And I mean, so I look back though, and I find them so endearing because they were her ways of expressing her love.
Absolutely. My mother was that way. There were so many things you couldn't step on this. You had to do this. You don't split a pole. You don't. I was like, oh my goodness.
Right. You'll be an old maid if you do the same thing twice. So I got so paranoid. When I went to get in the bathtub, I had to say, now, did I get in my left foot the last time or the right foot?
I know. My mom had me afraid to whistle in the house because she said a whistling woman and a crowing hen, that would mean I would never get a husband. I was like, I whistled in the house one day.
That's my problem.
No.
That's what I've done wrong. I've been whistling.
Why did I do that? Oh my goodness. Awesome. Okay, the conversion of Sam is another one that I really enjoyed. It talks about racism and how it can afflict well-meaning white individuals. And it's the main part of it is there's a generous white man who gives a young black man a place to stay, offering him all of his furniture. But when Sam fails to live up to the man's expectation, the benefactor turns sour on him, telling him, I treated you like you were white, but you didn't appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that was on page 39, if you have your book where that came up. What are your thoughts on this one? Where was Zora trying to tell us?
Lots of things. I think one thing she's trying to make sure that she, as an artist, creatively explores is the fact that people are different. So first of all, she's showing during this time the generosity of someone where she could have chosen to just be one tone in the way she wrote. So she says this man had good intentions. He was trying to help someone, but his own beliefs and expectations were too high for Sam's mindset to allow him to change and be who he was calling him to be, given his history and his experience. But I like that she explores I'm trying here, but you won't meet my expectations. It's like, instead of just making everybody a bad guy because they're white, or, certain stereotype because they're Black. I like that she did that.
I agree. And it's really poignant right now, with Black Lives Matter and well-meaning. And I think the thing is that people have the greatest of intention, and they don't, as you say, they're not setting out to do something wrong. But sometimes our own racism, we don't know that it exists there until it kind of comes out. And we all have bias, and we all have, from the way that we were raised and just our experiences. So I think she did a really good job of exploring a really interesting topic, how racism can afflict those who are well-meaning. It could be you or I, any of us. It can afflict anyone.
This story is not just then. That's like, I think you alluded to that. This could be like now,
right?
It's beautifully written. It could be something that now, like, just change the conditions of the offer that has been made, make it something more contemporary. But it's the same story, and I just like, she's brilliant.
Isn't she? Thank you. I love her. She is my favorite. She is brilliant. Any others? What do you think of just the theme or something that stuck with you in the conversion of Sam?
He really wasn't converted.
Wasn't.
No, I mean, again, his intentions were good, just as you said about the benefactor, but he ultimately returned to his familiar ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I think her understanding of human nature, regardless of whether they're white or Black or whatever, we're all the same that way, in that those early years and formations are pretty much what we are. Certain things come along in our life, maybe that turn us a little bit, but I just, when you get really old, which I am, you begin to go right back into those early beliefs and ways of being. Yeah. I saw that with my parents. Yeah.
That's a really good point. And I'm sorry, your name's not coming up.
It's Peggy Maroney. I'm a docent at the Tempe History Museum for the last 30 years, and I'm a storyteller. I'm also on the Arts and Culture Commission, and I'm a docent at the Tempe Center for the Arts. I taught English literature, and Zora is perhaps the best short story writer I have ever run across.
Yeah. Isn't she though? Oh, thank you, Peggy. You're named after my favorite. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm recording. One of my favorite sisters. My favorite sister, Peggy. Love that. Love that. But you're right. What you said really struck with me is that those formative years, that's who we are. That's what we revert back to. I mean, it's just human nature. And as I get older, I see it. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm becoming my parents. How did this happen? I said I would never do this, but it's just so true, so true. And you're right. She is a wonderful writer, storyteller, and the way that she understands the human experience and the care that she takes and the words that she uses. They're all just so important to her stories and what makes them timeless. I really think that we all said this could be now.
Yep.
It didn't have to be during that time. Mm-hmm. It is the timeless flight of being a human. It is just a timeless flight. Anyone else have anything to share on the conversion of Sam? Really convert. But
I do. I want to say real quickly, Peggy has been a avid supporter of the AAC since we started, and she hasn't said that, but she has, and everything that we do, she comes out. And so, Peggy, thank you for being part of the book club. And then I also have something to share, Felicia, like we all say. You know, Peggy said it, he wasn't converted because we all have things that we think people should do or be a certain way. And then the fact that he told him, I treated you like you were white.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that shows prejudice there, because he didn't say, I treated you like you were another human being,
Right.
of God, that he had to put it in terms of color.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was what was in him.
Yep.
Yeah. And it came out, but you didn't appreciate it. Absolutely. Very strong.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Michelle. Anyone else? All right. Then the shortest one comes up, A Bit of Harlem. And I like this. And I like these Harlem pictures here. So A Bit of Harlem, I think, is one of my favorite. It's about a hunchback orphan boy, hunchback, I love that, in his teens, who sells cheap candy in the neighborhood. And I could just see this boy doing this, selling his candy in the neighborhood. And he has this conversation with this young woman whose parents are also deceased. And the woman is touched by a feeling of fellowship and sympathy toward the boy. Very short story. I mean, what is just a couple of pages, really? But so much came out of this short story. What were your thoughts on this? A bit of Harlem. Bit of our Harlem. Actually, I wrote that wrong. It's our Harlem. A bit of our Harlem. She personified Harlem. What did you guys see in this? So I'll read a little bit of it. He came into the shop with a pitifully small amount of cheap candy to sell. The men gruffly refused to buy or even look at his wares, and he shuffled toward the back door with such a forlorn air that the young lady called him back. She was smiling partly because she liked to smile and did so whenever fate gave her a chance. I love that. She only smiled when fate gave her a chance, and partly to put the tattered little hunchback at his ease. The boy approached the table where the girl sat with the air of a homeless dog who hopes that he has found a friend. Isn't that beautiful? Let me see candy, little boy. She toyed with the paper wrapped packages for a while. She knew that she would buy one, even though she had but 15 cents in her pocketbook and a very vague notion as to where her next week's rent would come from. The hunchback boy looked too dejected to turn away. However, she handed him a nickel. How many of you would do that? I would. You got to, even if it was my last dollar, that'd be more our days. He was so dejected, and just the heart that she had for him. That's our Harlem. We take care of one another. What else did you guys see in there? Peggy, you were going to say something.
Well, I'm always going to say something.
That's the English teacher in you now that I know. You have to come back. I was an English teacher too.
Well, for so long, and still, people treat other people with disabilities in so many bad ways. And yet, when you get to know a person with disabilities, often they're just terrific human beings. We had one of my nephews was born with a syndrome, and he was a little person, and he would have terrible pain, and then when the pain would go away, he would just kind of say, "Happy boy." He never wanted to share his pain with anybody. He just wanted everyone to be happy. Aww. So I thought about him.
Whenever. That's touching. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
He taught us to love and to look beyond people's disabilities.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that true? That is so beautiful. And sometimes people have a difficulty with that. And again, this could timeless. This could be now. Mm-hmm. And the Paralympics are on right now. So I've been enjoying those. So yes. So this is definitely fresh for me. Anyone else?
You pointed out that I forgot, but he was an orphan, but she was an orphan too. And I wonder if there's some piece of her that identified with him because she saw herself and the loneliness, um, and it made her have even more sympathy, or not sympathy, empathy. I think
Empathy. She felt for him. Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone else? That was another part I wanted to read. This is what I'm on page 42 when she's talking about going to heaven. Around the third from the bottom paragraph. She said, when I go to heaven, I be white as snow, and the angel's going to take this lump out of my back and make me tall. I guess maybe they roll something over my back like that machine, what they rolls out the street with. The girl felt very much like laughing at this original idea, but seeing his serious face, she resisted and asked him very kindly how old he was. Let's see, answered the boy. Grandma, she say I'm 15. Teacher, she say I'm 16. I guess I'm 16 because once, long time ago, I was 15 before. The young lady exhibited signs of flagging interest and asked no more questions, but the boy showed no inclination to go. His eyes never left her face, and at last he asked, where's your mama and papa? Both dead. Who take care of you then? Why, I do myself. Nobody buys you nothing to eat neither? No. The humpback boy looked pitying at the girl, at himself, at the floor, and at last said in a voice full of pity, I guess maybe I can put on some long pants and marry you, and then I'll buy you something to eat. Oh, just human nature, and just that moment that they had together, that connection. I think it's just beautiful the way she wrote that they cared for each other. And like Tara, you were saying, that empathy from them both. And even he showed the empathy for her when she told him that she also didn't have her family, her parents. Just Zora, the beauty of how she wrote about people.
Yeah, and she, in just a short story, she fully develops her characters. You know them. Yes, you feel like they could be your friend. Yeah. I mean, she just...
Her word choice.
Pure genius. Absolutely.
Absolutely genius.
Yeah.
The choice of words, the setting, all of it.
Exactly. She must have really loved people and observed them very well. Not just her own lived experience, but other people's too. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. It shows. It really shows.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything to add on that? A bit of our Harlem. I apologize for that typo there. Okay, if not, I know our time's coming short. I only wanted to do the first three tonight. I want to continue with Zora. And what I want to do next time is I'm going to discuss of course, the ones that were lost, that just came out. And then I'll probably pick a couple of more, and that'll give you time to get through more of the short stories. They're very well written. I think that they're best when they're read aloud personally. So, because you can really just hear the language and the dialect. Go ahead, Peggy.
I listened to her works on an audio, and it was Genevieve West, and her pronunciation, the use of the idiom was so perfect that you realize that her words were poetic too. I mean, the sound of it is so beautiful.
A
and
cadence.
She switched back and forth from the male voice to the female voice. And just in the softening of her voice, if you get to hear her audio version,
I'll have to do that.
Genevieve West, yeah, it's just wonderful.
Genevieve West, thank you.
Yeah.
You're right. Her words are poetic. There's a cadence in them, and every word had a purpose. She was genius. We've all said that. She just had a brilliance in her. And that's why people could see that from such a very young age and from having such hardships. So, for our next discussion, we're going to come back on December the 30th, also at 6 p.m. And we'll be discussing those stories that were lost and probably a couple more.
You mean September, right?
What am I? Did I say what I say?
December.
I'm thinking about Christmas. September 30th. September the 30th at 6 p.m. So
I have a little dilemma I want to share with you.
Yes, Christine.
I checked out the book from the Hayden Library at ASU. And I see that you have a paperback. And the stories that we're talking about here are not in this book, in this edition. So I'm going to have to go back and see if I can find the edition that you have that tells me and shows me the cover, because the edition that I have, when this was first published, 1999.
Oh, no. Yeah, you don't have this one. I'm sure you could probably check it out, the Tempe Public Library.
I'm wondering, would you, well, this is a reprint. It's not a reprint, but it's a different version. It's a different revised edition of this original 1999. The stories are not.
They're not the same. No, the one that we're using, where is the publication date? 2020.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's why I'm a little confused, because I wasn't reading what everybody else is reading.
Gotcha. Well, stay on after. I don't know if we've stopped the recording, but we can stop the recordings. Our next discussion will be September 30th at 6 p.m.